Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. On behalf of Bob Kalka, who is here with me, who's the global head of security at IBM, and myself, Jim Skidmore, we're grateful for your attendance today. We're going to go deeply into kind of a little bit about the history of IAM and then get to really the latest state of innovation now from a Verify perspective. I think you'll find it to be incredibly insightful, and I think you'll see some things and discuss some things that you've never seen or discussed before. As you may be aware, throughout all the iterations of IBM identity and access management history since about 2002, there have been many milestones along the way, from request-based provisioning to role-based to automating that process for move, add, change, to all the integration with federations that we do, to consumer identity and access management now, to the ability to really provide you with end-to-end visibility into user activity tools across cloud, SaaS, and on-premise applications, which I've never seen before, and I've been involved in probably 1,000 engagements or so. So with that, I welcome Bob. Bob, I know we've come a long way. It's going to be really interesting to hear about detect, threat, and respond, and also what posture management has for us.
Yeah, indeed, Jim. So it's great to see everybody on here. So as Jim said, Bob Kalk, I'm a global lead for security at IBM. In particular, I am in my 31st year of working on identity management at IBM. So I've had basically every job, from running the entire portfolio to running specialty sales teams to running the technical team. And over that time, I've been meeting with folks like you over the entire time. I've stopped counting actually how many miles I've flown, because it's obscene. And so Jim and I are really excited to bring this to you today, because identity's got a strange vibe to it. Identity is a thing that everybody pays a ton of attention to for a while, and then we convince ourselves that we're doing good enough, so we focus elsewhere, and then we go, oh shoot, we kind of need to come back to it. And the title of this thing is indicative of that. So what is identity visibility, or let's use the cool kids term, identity observability, right? In hybrid IAM environments. What does hybrid IAM environments mean? I don't think that outside of very small shops, there's anyone that isn't a hybrid IAM environment. And yet I talk to clients almost every day, literally for 30 years on this topic. And when I ask in the last couple of years, what's your hybrid IAM strategy? At least 90% of the time, the answer that I get is, oh, well, we're standardizing on fill in the blank, Okta, Ping, SailPoint, Verify, Microsoft, whatever happens to be. And they said, well, we're standardizing on that. And I said, well, that's not a strategy, it's a tool. And they go, yeah, but we did this kind of bake off, and we've got this homegrown system from 25 years ago that, we've been modestly successful getting off of. We put an on-prem system in 10 to 12 years ago. We're kind of standardizing on a new SaaS tool typically. And, we're partnering with our DevOps teams who are kind of doing their own thing with secrets management and that kind of stuff. And I go, well, there you go. That's hybrid. We've got identities being managed all over the place. So what we're going to show you here is, what does that reality of how almost everybody manages identities today, and how has observability and visibility become kind of one of the hottest things within that space? Because to use the words of an old friend of mine in the industry is the Vodafone CISO, Emma Smith. And she said to me years ago, she said, Bob, if you can't see it, you can't secure it. Simple, direct, but so true. And so we say, well, what does it mean to care about identity observability? What are we trying to observe? That's what we're going to talk about here, because there's some incredible things happening. So Fortunately, we're in a phase in the industry where the interest in this topic and the focus on it is really, really exploding. We're about 18 months into that, which is a good thing. And the reason I'd assert to you is it's exploding is that all the stats that are coming out paint a picture that says we're really not doing as well as we need to be doing on identity and access management. So, for example, out of the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Index, the 71% year-to-year increase in cyber attacks that use compromised credentials. There's another stat out there that a lot of vendors are using, including us, that 80% of all attacks are based on identities right now. This says 60% of all attacks from the IDSA study, whether it's 60 or 80, we know a lot of them are based on this. And then finally, we have 84% of organizations have faced identity-related breaches. By the way, I just gave you a couple of the numbers. There's another stat that just came out that I just saw last week that 90%, I forget who did this study, but 90% of all organizations have had at least one container Kubernetes cyber event in the last year. So do the math, whatever stat speaks to you the most. The fact is that the way that we're managing identities in today's modernized hybrid environments is not as effective as it needs to be. So let me explain to my assertion of what it really looks like at the end of the day. So being able to see what's going on is a big deal. And so why does this become a thing? Now, forgive the use of the trendy terms at the top, an AI-infused identity fabric. What does that mean? I'm going to make it really simple. Is that all an identity fabric says is, can you take everywhere that you're managing users, and let's be clear, human and non-human identities, how do we take all the places that we're managing human and non-human identities and their access rights and the secrets associated with them, et cetera, and how do we get these things to collaborate together into a fabric, right? That's what we're talking about when we say identity fabric. And the reason for throwing in the AI infused thing there is the simple fact that, as you'll see in this discussion today, because it's heavily based on an AI model that's been out there for about 4 years, is it the ability to use AI to get observability and visibility that we just would not be able to do at scale, let alone at all, is a huge deal. So I'm putting that up there up front because you're going to see that this is another example of how AI can do stuff that we just have to be able to do. But anyways, so when I walk into a client typically, and we start talking about IAM, inevitably we start talking about the two classes of users with a workforce and consumers. I will tell you that going forward, you're going to see a lot more discussion on 3 classes of users. You have the workforce, the consumers, and then the machines, right? You can have all the machine identities of application objects that are being rolled out and need to connect to other applications. And that's essentially a form of a non-human identity. So you're going to see a lot more coming on that soon. But for today, most of the discussions I get in are in the workforce and consumers. And once again, when I ask what's your strategy, I'll say, oh, well, we standardize on, name your favorite, typically SaaS-based IDP, and we've standardized on a directory more often than not, Active Directory. People out there using LDAP directories and all that kind of stuff. And we say that's kind of where we want everybody to migrate to. And so anyone who's been in this space for any length of time, as soon as you hear that, whether you're the one saying those words or hearing them, you're going, oh boy. Because what are you going to do with all those legacy apps that don't even support MFA? How are you going to pull that into this thing? Oh, well, that's a sunk cost. Well, sunk cost means you continually manage a policy separately for all this stuff. So the reality, if you look at what we see in most shops today, you're going to see at least one additional IDP focused on workforce. And by the way, on the directory point, I had a client just share with me a couple of months ago, said, I thought I had at least the directory side of this, of where I'm managing users licked, because I've standardized on Active Directory. He said, but he says, I just did an operational review with my team and realized I've got a team managing Active Directory on-prem. I've got a second team managing it in Azure and a third team managing it in AWS. And the force don't connect. He says, so I actually haven't solved this. I've got one technology, but it's still not being managed consistently. right? So we've got a couple IDPs here to manage the stuff, and typically, the 25-year-old legacy system. And then you have all these legacy apps where we still every day run into clients that'll have that old legacy app. The developers aren't even around in the company anymore. And they're using a side file with username and passwords in it. There's still a ton of that stuff out there. And so we say, okay, well, we got to manage them there. And then we get to hybrid cloud, right? And we're managing identities in multiple clouds as well. So I had shown a client this a couple of weeks ago, right before the holiday, and he laughed and said, "Yeah, that's welcome to my rat's nest of identity technologies." I love that term. Well, anyways, but the point is these are all the places that we're taking our policy that supposedly will allow us to define what identities, what groups, what roles, what are the access rights associated with that. If we want to do least privilege, zero trust stuff, can we do that? And then roll that out consistently across our entire environment. What that means is doing that where all these red dots are. And how many organizations really do that well? Please, if you are doing that, please contact me offline, because I'd love to find you, because not many people are. Right? So now the point that this is kind of ugly, and the reason why, obviously, visibility of problems like posture, like Jim said, around identity posture, around all these different points that we're managing stuff, it kind of becomes obvious visually why that's attractive. But here's what affects the business about it, is that there's a number of use cases that people want to be able to do today that they cannot because of this rat's nest. For example, frictionless authentication, right? Passwordless, using FIDO2 passkeys. You can accelerate the growth of the business because you're able to get a better, easier user experience. You're able to reduce costs because you're not sitting doing password reset problems all the time. And you're reducing the risk because obviously, like a FIDO2 passkey is far more secure than a password. So we see people all over the world wanting to shift to frictionless authentication. How do you roll out, just for sake of discussion, FIDO2 passkeys consistently across all those red dots? It's rhetorical. You can't. Or if you do, you're wasting too much money, right? Doing it manually in a lot of different places. So that's one of the things people want to be able to do. We know this well at IBM. The entire IBM company today runs on our IBM Verify identity management stack. We're managing 30.5 million users today, 30 million consumer outside and 500,000 internally for workforce, all through our Verify tool. And we've turned on the passkeys, the FIDO2 passkeys. And all of a sudden, overnight, the impact that the CIO's office here saw was dramatic because it was easier and more secure to do stuff, even to have an impact on cost immediately. So that's one. How about threat management? Okay. So how do people do identity-based threat management today? And once again, I've been doing security 30 years. I've seen every trend. I've been in the middle of most of them to some degree. And the best practice out there for finding identity threats until 18 months ago was turn on some kind of user behavior analytics module in your SIM within the SOC. And if you've ever used one of those tools, what it does is take that massive glut of information coming into the SIM tool, and it tries to deduce identity problems, right? And so it doesn't do well at things like detecting brute force attacks, for example. It does nothing for finding real-time usage like bypassing MFA policy, stuff like that. It just tries to deduce things. And obviously, by the stats I shared with you earlier, it's not working very well. So about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years, if I'm being generous, everybody started talking about, the acronym that's coming, ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response. And the evidence that this is a latent need in our industry is the fact that not only did ITDR take off quickly, and there were about 30 startups within about a year, but now everybody claims to do ITDR. I mean, nobody in the identity space does not talk about ITDR now, Identity Threat Detection Response, because everybody knows that the way they were doing it was not sufficiently effective nor efficient. So everybody's doing ITDR now, and of course us too, right? And everybody's defining it based on what their tools do and stuff. Welcome to, the vendor world. But what we've discovered, and Jim and I have been doing this stuff together for a very long time, is the most effective part and the most compelling part of ITDR right now is actually not ITDR. Because ITDR is how do you detect real-time identity threats and then mitigate them, either by running some tasks or calling out to a SOAR playbook in your SOAR tool to go mitigate, right, the threat associated with the problem. And we'll get into a few minutes, a couple of examples of the more common threats that people are actually detecting and mitigating today. But the more compelling part of this is the whole idea of identity posture. And what I mean by identity posture is this. And the term everybody's using now is ISPM, Identity Security Posture Management. What ISPM is all about is, do I have any shadow identities out there that I'm not actively managing that I didn't realize were there? Or do I have an identity that I know, but I've got a user on that same box logging into a local account and getting access through different means than I expect? So do I have any shadow identity uses? Shadow directories, I could tell you this because we've been doing this for about a year heavily, is that every organization in the world has directories that a team or department set up, and they're using to authenticate users to some subset of apps or systems. So how can you assure an auditor that you've got a correct policy, access policy deployed for all your assets if you have people authenticating against directories you didn't even know existed? And I'm telling you, everybody's got them, and I can prove it to you. So shadow directories. How about shadow assets? How about shadow usage of SaaS properties that you didn't know people were using? So this whole concept of shadow identities and shadow directories, et cetera, that's a posture problem, right? To us, because what it's defined as is, how have I done identity management in a sloppy way, poor posture, that causes me more likely to be breached? Well, if you have shadow assets and you don't know about them, or you kind of know they're there, but you refuse to look because you go, I don't really have time to deal with this, then you wonder why there's problems with identities. That's a big one. So threat management, we would assert, is addressed through identity protection would be the noun, I guess, or verb, depending how you look at it. And it's a combination of ITDR and ISPM. Okay, what about this one? So I put out our LDAP directory server in 1996, one of my first product management jobs. And we now have, for example, one client is in production with over 500 million identities with us. We actually believe we've got the largest identity management deployment in the world here with our IBM Verify technology. We have one client, I can't say the name for obvious reasons, but there's 500 million users in production today in this tool. One of the challenges that we are from the audit side of things is, hey, can you show me a single source of truth for who has access to any of your systems? That was a huge topic in the late 1990s. That's why there was, if you were around then doing this stuff, there was that craze on meta directories and virtual directories, because it's embarrassing not to be able to answer that question. Do I have a single source of truth who has access to anything in my IT systems? Well, guess what? It's come back full force. We're doing a bunch of virtual directory projects these days because people are realizing that as they've gone hybrid cloud, there's no single source of truth. And so all of a sudden we're seeing virtual directories, meta directories making a comeback because it's a very simple question that's a yes or no. And barely anyone can do that today. And then a final one, but there's dozens, but I'm just sharing you some of the highlights that we're seeing that are on people's minds the most. Cyber insurance providers have figured out that everybody does PAM, privileged access management, but very few do it for every privileged account. In other words, there's a lot of partial deployments of PAM out there. And I have literally heard from over 30 CISOs in the last year that, well, really CISOs and IAM leaders, that they're saying, look, my cyber insurance provider just came to me and said, unless you can prove to me that you know where all your privileged users are and that you have proper PAM or appropriate compensating controls against it, we're either not going to renew your policy we're going to up the rate to this, or if it's a new one, we're not going to issue the policy. So all of a sudden, there is like this massive focus on PAM because of the fact that, when Sarbanes-Oxley came out in 03, I remember the first directive was thou shalt do PAM. Well, we're back to thou shalt do PAM, and do it consistently across the board. So these are just 4 use cases of the problems that this rat's nest of identity technologies is causing for organizations. So what we realized, and we came up with this about 2 years ago and started making major changes to how we invest in our IBM Verify technology, of what are the technologies you need to build a fabric out of this, to allow these things to group together. And let me be very, very clear about something. Our attitude towards this, because IBM is a hybrid cloud and AI company, that's what we specialize in. We love hybrid problems and we're really good at them because we major on it. A lot of other vendors will say, yeah, we support hybrid environments, but it's I support and I favor my environment with 95% of my attention. And I throw out enough out there to try to pull in some stuff for you. We see the world as a hybrid problem. And that's what we've done here. So the way that we have defined and built the ability to build this identity fabric and get into the identity protection, which is where I'm going next, is literally the ability to do it regardless of what tools if you have. You have Okta, SailPoint, Microsoft, cool. What I'm about to show you works with all of them. You don't have to have our stack to be able to build this fabric for themselves. So the 7 elements. You got to have identity orchestration, and it needs to be multi-vendor. The most common orchestrated workflow we're seeing right now, clients do, is the ability to take a bunch of legacy apps that don't even support MFA and add passwordless support to it. How do you do that? When the user authenticates, say to the side file and the password, your orchestration engine creates an identity in a modern IDP like Verify, Octoping, whatever, set the MFA policy, set the passwordless policy, and then use an application gateway to shim into the legacy app and automate that process. That's the most popular orchestrated workflow that we're seeing. And the way we do it, once again, it doesn't matter what identity tools you have, it works with all of them. Secondly is risk-based authentication. Oh, this will be a topic for another thing from Jim and I for you at some point here. All this says is everybody's doing adaptive access, right? Adaptive authentication. And the one thing that's a big pain in the industry, as you saw in the first stat that I showed, is that leveraging compromised credentials has become a major league problem. So when someone compromises a credential and then logs into it and starts doing stuff, how can you tell that it's a compromised thing? What risk-based authentication, or RBA as we call it, is adding an AI engine that does behavioral analysis, meaning your online behavior, like your typing rate and stuff like that, like they use in banking to detect transactional fraud. So if you come in and you've compromised a credential and that person has logged in 342 times before, and we know what their typing rate is and the dynamics in it, when that hacker comes in and authenticates, you're going to say that doesn't match the pattern. You can identify it right then. So that's risk-based authentication. That's rock star stuff. Third is shimming into legacy apps. Fourth is ITDR and ISPM. That's what we're going to spend the rest of the time on here. Directory sync somehow 25 years later has gotten hot again. Obviously, you got to have good governance. You got to address PAM, right? And what we've noticed is that there is a maturity model to how people are deploying these various identity fabric technologies. And that's what leads us right down the center here on this whole concept of identity protection, ITDR, ISPM, identity observability. Because essentially the maturity model we're seeing is people start in one of two places. Either they start here of inspecting the security posture. Do we have shadow identity silos? Do we have misconfigurations and policies? Do we have conflicts where we see over entitlement of identities and continuously evaluating that? That's become a very popular place to start. So much so that you'll see at the end, we're offering you a no cost view of what you've got going on. Secondly, is you then connect the identity silos into a fabric, frictionless authentication to accelerate the business, that advanced behavioral analysis on authentication, and working with any technology, any of the major technologies are there. And then finally is protecting the attacks themselves. This is the ITDR side of things, whereas inspect is the ISPM side of things, but detecting risky behaviors. And I'll say more in a sec about what kind of behaviors we're talking about here. So that's kind of the maturity model. So what we've done is we came out with an incredibly innovative solution last year. That is an AI engine that's been being trained for about 4 years, and we're doing it in a partnership with a company that IBM invested a bunch of money in called Authmind, AUTHMIND. And the reason why we started working with those guys is that at the time, as I said, there was about 30 companies that claimed to do ITDR. We looked at every one of them, and there was one that stood apart from all the others. It wasn't even close. It's why IBM's invested money in them, and it's why we continue to work with them. And that's the Authmind guys. It's because, and this is their slogan, and it's just brilliant, right? Hackers don't break in anymore; they just log in. Compromised credentials become the big thing. So what has happened is the way to do identity protection is the combination of ITDR and ISPM. So ISPM would be the discovering vulnerability side of things. Where do I have blind spots in where there are identities, where they're authenticating, how they're getting access to applications, and how they're actually doing that stuff? That's the posture management side. Then the ITDR side, the threat detection and response side of it, is detect the risky activities, right? Where do you, for example, the most common one is MFA bypass. This application sensitive, the policy is you got to go through MFA, and this is how you get access to it. Can you detect when there is one or some number of users who are getting access to that application without going through whatever MFA capability you have? How do you even detect that, right? And then once you detect it, how do you lock it down? That's the ITDR side of things. And this is something that, the Authmind guys have nailed. And so once again, we call this verify identity protection. So let me show you a little bit more. So, whoops, I think, there we go. So it is an AI engine at its root. Gartner was a cool vendor 2 years ago for stuff in it. It was beyond cool. Here's how it does its magic, because it's very easy to explain. It's an AI engine that's been tuned for the last, 4.25 years. It pulls in 3 sources. It pulls in all your network flow traffic, all your cloud flow traffic, and all the identity events. That's what it's looking at. So it's looking at reality. It's saying what's going on. And I'll give you an example. I've got an identity, a valid identity, but it's authenticating against a directory I didn't even know exists. It's accessing this application, but we're never seeing any engagement with our MFA engine, indicating a bypass, right? It just sees it because it's just innocently looking at all this stuff. And we've been tuning the engine for 4 years, the AI engine, and it's gotten really smart about, you need to look at this because this just doesn't fit. So that's the magic of this thing that we call verified identity protection, is that it's just pulling in these 3 sources and showing you, as you'll see, in a very attractive way, an incredibly accessible dashboard that you can dive down into any level you want to on this stuff. But it shows you, where do you have shadow activity? Where do you have MFA bypasses, ZTNA bypasses, VPN bypass? It can detect all of that stuff. Where do you have identities that have a bunch of privileges, haven't been used in a long time, and all of a sudden you're seeing a spike in usage of those identities? That's the stuff that it finds. But then it also has connectors with other tools, such as tools like the QRadar SOAR, Radar Resilient acquisition. So if you find something, you can actually call out to the SOAR engine and kick off a playbook to do it. So this is an identity observability. It's doing both ISPM as well as ITDR. And here's, spend a minute on this, because this is what we're seeing. I mean, we literally are looking for, it's over 150 different things inside of verified identity protection that it's looking for relative to that data that's pulling in from cloud flows, network flows, and identity activity. These 3 categories of all the clients using this already are the things that they go to first. Okay, so we thought it was important to share that. So what kind of identity blind spots? Let's say you have assets that you didn't even realize were rolled out. Shadow access. One of the things that we're seeing a lot is you'll see policy deviations where a user will be on a box with a formal identity, they're authenticated properly, they're doing stuff, but then they'll log into a local account they've created on that machine and getting access as well. And you're going, wait a minute, where did that come from? And what are they doing? So shadow assets, shadow identity systems, shadow directories, as I said, shadow password managers. That's an interesting one. It's very tactical, but you might say, hey, we've standardized on this password manager because we vetted it. And then you find that there's 5 other password managers people are using, right? And it's shadow SaaS usage. That's the first category of blind spots, things you just didn't realize were happening, but they are. Second is identity infrastructure issues. So bypass. I've talked about MFA several times here, but any kind of formal security policy that you say this to access this should be present, because it's looking at the activity, you can see when that's not happening. So the bypasses, we're looking for MFA, ZTNA, VPN, and even PAM controls. And so we can detect when someone's accessing something not using the front end security that you expect in that thing. We look at credential hygiene, we look at service accounts, obviously, and suspected attacks on identity systems. So it's looking for early indication of like a brute force attack kind of thing, right? And then finally, the risky activity is literally the bypasses and the suspicious activity. And once again, that's where having an AI model that's been trained for 4 years comes in really handy, because we've been able to vet a lot of activity that looked risky but isn't, and then it looked risky and is. So the model's gotten really good at getting out the noise and saying an identity, let's say, maybe it's an identity with not that many privileges, but it's something that was used a lot, used not at all, and all of a sudden starts getting used again, right? It flags it for you in a non-intrusive way, so you can go and look at it and decide if it's a real problem for you, right? So that's kind of the root of what this stuff is doing. And the way, once again, it works is through this AI engine. So what we do is we pull in flow activity from logs, from SIM tools, from your actual network device, right? We're using your authentication and accessed activity. We're using risk intelligence feeds of where are you seeing problems out there, and of course the directories themselves. And then what we do is go through the AI engine and then show you. And then once again, often when a vendor says ITDR, it's kind of funny because what they're really talking about is ITD. I can detect an identity threat, and now you need to go do something about it. So this is true ITDR, because what we do is, once again, we give you the ability in Verify Identity Protection to either like have a simple run book, or if you have a SOAR engine, as I've already said twice, you can call out to the SOAR engine, do a more complex run book, okay, in this thing. So there's a lot of ways to deploy this Verify Identity Protection. You can set it up to any of the flow sensors in your network. You can attach it directly to like your cloud-based SIM or your on-prem SIM. And we just came out with, I didn't even put it on here yet because it literally just came out a couple of weeks ago, is we can run it on-prem now. It's a SaaS tool, but we can actually run it on-prem now as well. So pretty powerful. So let me give you an example, like a pragmatic example of the things that Verify Identity Protection could have helped in something which was clearly a major league seismic event out there in the Change Healthcare breach in particular. And if you've read up on the Change Healthcare breach, which I'm assuming a lot of you have, I mean, it was not radical, right, what they did. They exploited a 0-day, created an admin account, created a new user account, use that to go download some ransomware, and then do what they do, right? So what we did is an analysis with the Authmind folks of what kinds of things can we detect that would have put up red flags at any point throughout that flow, because obviously that flow is not that unique. It's actually a very common one. So first of all, as soon as you saw that new cloud account get created and start accessing an asset that they didn't realize that was exposed, we can detect that. We can detect the active use of an unauthorized remote access solution. So when they used the a remote desktop capability to go do that, we could have detected that that was happening. All right. Detecting attempts to enumerate accounts, right? Enumerating accounts is where you kind of the hacker will send in and try to get information from like URLs and everything of account names and stuff that they can then go focus on. Is we can detect when that's happening with this. We can detect user access with weak credentials. We can detect attacks to find brute force attacks. You can detect the remote desktop access to a key server for the first time, saying, wait a minute, why is that happening? That's a new thing. What's going on here? Right? And so on and so forth. So remember, the whole topic here is identity observability. It kind of translate that into both threat detection response as well as the posture management. And because of the way that we do that with that just, I like to call it innocent because it just says, don't tell me what you think is happening. Show me what's actually happening. And that combination of pulling in cloud flows and network flows and identity activity gives us that visibility, that observability that people are looking for. So, Jim, let me pull you in here because we've done a lot of work together over the, I might say, decades,
Yeah, it's a
and
couple of them.
and you guys are really pragmatic about what's happening at the ground level. So why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every time I hear the new download, I think it's a very interesting scenario. You're also the only person larger than us that I know of that's managing an LDAP larger than 130 million people. So congratulations on that. Um, yeah, clearly the world is changing. It is hybrid. It is a snowflake schema of directory management now. Most people cannot handle it. We are seeing a lot of folks who, you even brought up PAM and kind of the heat map there. Well, all these people that bought PAM to get the free discovery tool, which is so 5 or 6 years ago, right, are now having to, kind of jump back into this. And I think the good news is they're jumping back in to a world that is clearly better. I won't be partisan, but what I can say from as Integro, we do work on a lot of technologies. But what I can say is, other than probably Microsoft AD having the same level of identity visibility for only AD and Azure AD accounts, IBM is the only one that I've ever seen that has this capability basically across the whole hybrid landscape. So, um, and we do really, really a lot of this. So, um,
Yeah.
I do think, you know, it's if you're looking now at the identity threat landscape and you're able to shore it up the way that you are able to now, if you take those steps, tools like attack surface management tools and other things, I don't want to say become obsolete because somebody may still have a dev environment out there exposed to the internet. But at the end of the day, where the phishing happens, you're pretty buttoned up. So, yeah, that's, and this has been, a very cool, I think, discussion with regard to the breadth and width of the capability here. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's just the biggest challenge that we see is being willing to see it,
yeah,
right? Is being willing to go there. And so one of the things that we offer with the Integral folks and others is we offer a free security posture assessment for you. And what we do is actually bring the tool in and just let it to wherever you'll let us look. We'll spend an hour or two with you and show you kind of what it finds that quick. And I don't think we've had any situations where nothing was found yet.
yeah,
Um, right? Because it could, but it's to say that it's a very healthy thing to be willing to look at it and then to go, okay, let's mitigate it, right? Let's risk rank it and then mitigate this stuff. And it will learn that with you as you kind of judge what's important to you. And so the dashboard will start giving you that kind of applied view of things. It's something that we offer at no cost. So it's probably a half day max of bringing one of our technical folks to meet with your team. And then we show you, and we're happy to do that. So that offer goes out to everybody who's on here today. So to close up my comments, once again, we're a hybrid cloud AI company at IBM, and this is a great example how by being, we've been in, well, technically been in security, you might say, since the 70s with RACF, but we've been in distributed security since the late 1990s, mid 1990s, actually. And, IBM has realized that security is crucial for everything in hybrid cloud and AI. And so we've made the investments to be innovative here and favoring AI-based solutions like this one is purely. So we'd love to be able to work with you on this. And once again, we've got thousands of employees focused on this stuff. And I think I've been here longer than anyone, probably, which is a little scary to say. Probably shouldn't even say that. But we've, like I said, we've got the world's largest known identity management deployment. We've got thousands of clients. We know how to do this, and this has been out for about a year. And we could do things that could help consistently and dramatically for you. So we're doing this. I appreciate the invite from Indigo to talk with them. We all know each other really well, and we know that these guys and gals do incredible work. So, Jim, why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is just paying the bills. If you don't know who we are, our focus is really on security compliance, risk management, and digital transformation. We are a managed identity company, and we are an integrator of a multitude of 8 other security pillars of tools. So I won't go into all that right now. We are renowned for our IAM prowess and capability, both in an advisory and implementation perspective. Our focus is really also now on really value-based pricing and helping our clients to continuously improve. And I think that's really important because we all must morph and pivot so that we don't get into situations where we continually have orphans in the LDAP, that we don't continually have all the challenges that we find over the course of time. Bob talked a little about role management earlier. There's still, from an access governance perspective, so many people in every organization that have access to things that they used to do because they never evolved and people haven't automatically made those changes. So, I think it's important, to have advisors and partners, whether they're doing a project for you or you can stay with them over the course of time just to pick their brains on things, right? And that's kind of the role I play. That's kind of the role we play with regard to our many clients out there, but also even folks that we used to work with. We work with CISA. We work with a number of different advisory groups, kind of all over the US and internationally in some cases, to ensure that we're all following best practices to the best of our ability. And I think we all know the world is changing at a very large rate of speed. Many changes to come in the coming year, many changes to come the year after that. We know what AI is doing right now. We were talking about it this morning with some friends. We know what's going on with the new quantum encryption standards coming forth in 25. There are so many potential threat vector issues that are coming up that the collaboration and the partnership is something that we strive for. We do have some things that we do on a gratis basis for folks. If you want to flip that over, I can. So we do some things with CISA also. We do infrastructure readiness reviews for people that don't have this level of automation. So they can have a preliminary discussion, which basically involves kind of strategy and how you may go about leveraging some assets. We also do, as Bob mentioned earlier, identity security posture assessment with our IBM partners. Again, this is kind of a no-cost venture. I think it's probably a pretty good time to do it if you're thinking about kind of the future, even if it may not be next week or next month. But understanding where the market is going, but also understanding what potentially steps you can take to simplify your infrastructure and stay more easily embedded in your NIST framework and your MITRE framework, whatever your overall policy is. We also help people with zero trust maturity. Last year I worked with somebody on this, for example, which we began to work with afterwards. But, we realized they had like 26 roles in South America. Well, the net was they really only needed one, because we were really only going after one network share, which was managed in the US. But they couldn't see what they couldn't see because we weren't kind of, talking with them about it. And they weren't able to leverage microservices prior to that, or, any other kind of what I would call automation. We help people also preliminarily to take a look at their security posture, define what's really important and what's not in their mishmash of enormous complexity that most people are enduring today. And then from there, we help them usually to develop policy. So if there are standard group of applications that are critical, and data resiliency that's required, and whether they're running 365 or Gmail or whatever must-haves are involved in there, we'll help them define what the 2B model looks like, and then what policy every ad should really adhere to from there. We do ASM reviews with free pen tests. We've been doing those for a while. Like I said, you may not necessarily need that. If you are using tools like ISPM, but a lot of people would like to know continuously who the C2s are that are coming at them, what exposures they may have. I've been in meetings with customers. Another one last year where we were talking about their Azure footprint. And I said, yeah, but you really got to worry about these 3 instances of AWS you have, to which the CIO responded to me, we don't use AWS. But their marketing people in Europe do. And we only knew that because we were able to search on the domain and find every asset basically connected to them. So these are things that are, that we provide to the market. We also, like, as I said, look to do some work with CISA. We do some with others just to help them understand policy better. The newest area that we're probably working in now is AI policy. A lot of people don't really understand. I think there's someone on this call right now that I might have talked about this with this morning. But a lot of people don't really understand all the ramifications. We've seen CISA standards that are coming forward, but it's extremely difficult with all the AI vendors out there to gain, standardization kind of across the ecosystem. And I don't think it's ever going to happen. So, it's not just about your LLM. It's not just about, all of your data lakes and ponds out there. We were talking about open source capabilities this morning and a bunch of other things. If there are items that you haven't really thought about, we're happy to help you think through it. So these are just a couple of the things. We're grateful for your time today. I would also mention, if there are questions, you can, I think, certainly put them in the chat. And we're, again, thankful for you coming today. So let's just see. I'm going to check in with Bob and Courtney and see if there are any questions currently. I think
we'll give it a moment or two to give people time to submit a question if you'd like. Also, Bob and Jim are available offline if you would like to ask them any questions privately.
All right. right, I guess we're pretty good. So no further questions? Okay, awesome. Well, Bob, always a pleasure. Grateful for your time today. We can probably give people 7 minutes of their day back today, but thanks for bringing us up to speed really on a lot of the innovation going on, and you know, IBM's incredible exploration into, you know, the deepest depths of identity, and you know how we're evolving. We'll continue to do these, right? I know we're going to plan to do more events for continuous update for folks, so stay tuned. I know data resiliency is one area and some others, but we're grateful for everybody's time today. And as Courtney mentioned, if there are questions or thoughts or darn good notions, we're happy to hear them. So, all righty. So thanks everyone for joining, and please enjoy the weekend to come.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.